My first encounter with the inexplicable happened when I least expected it, during what was supposed to be a completely routine operation. That day, the waters off the Hawaiian coast were calm, with better visibility than usual for that depth. The mission was simple: document and inspect an area about 80 meters below the surface. I had done this dozens of times before. That was when I noticed, out of the corner of my eye, a soft glow that seemed out of place. At first, my brain tried to categorize it as something familiar, perhaps another diver or some equipment left behind. I adjusted my trajectory slightly, more out of curiosity than duty. As the distance closed, I realized I was facing something completely beyond my repertoire of underwater experiences. The object hovered a few meters above the seabed, an impossible presence to classify. It was approximately 3 meters long, with a shape that vaguely resembled a rhombus, but its edges defied comprehension. They moved fluidly, as if made of denser water, a semi-transparent gelatin that maintained its form while simultaneously appearing to be in constant flux. But what truly made me question my senses was the luminescence. A blue-green light emanated from within it, pulsing at a steady rhythm, like a slowly beating heart. The light didn't spread much through the water, seeming to be contained within a kind of aura surrounding the object. When I got within 5 meters, I noticed an immediate reaction. The object began to move, retreating smoothly, keeping the same distance from me. It wasn't fleeing. It felt more like it was studying me just as I was studying it. I tried altering my approach, moving laterally, and the object responded with precision, adjusting its position to maintain that exact distance. After that day, I wrote detailed reports, describing every aspect of my observation with the precision that years of military training had given me. I received only skeptical looks and suggestions that I might have been experiencing nitrogen narcosis, the rapture of the deep that can cause hallucinations. But I knew how to distinguish between reality and illusion. During 15 years of diving, I had learned to recognize the subtle signs of narcosis, and none of them were present that day. Years passed before I encountered anything similar again, although this time, it was far more disturbing in nature. I was in the Gulf of Mexico, participating in a recovery operation after an oil platform accident. The water was murky that day, with reduced visibility and a cold current that made the work more challenging than usual. That was when I noticed it, at first, more as a sensation than a sound. A low hum, almost at the threshold of human perception. Initially, I thought it was some piece of recovery equipment, perhaps a remotely operated vehicle, ROV, operating on an unusual frequency. But as time passed, the vibration gradually intensified, reverberating through the water until I could feel it in my chest, like a second heartbeat. Following the sound, I deviated from my designated path. The current grew stronger as I approached the source, as if some force was manipulating the water around it. That's when I saw it, a metallic structure partially buried in the seabed, emerging from the sand like a shipwreck from another world. It was roughly the size of a school bus, with a smooth metallic surface devoid of visible seams or welding marks. There were no logos, serial numbers, or any other indication of human manufacturing. The light from my flashlight reflected strangely off its surface, as if the light itself was being distorted. The hum clearly emanated from within the structure, and when I hesitantly placed my hand on it, I felt a strange, constant vibration, as if a complex engine was running beneath that metallic skin. I took several photographs and collected samples of the surrounding sand, noting that it seemed finer and slightly different in color from the rest of the seabed. When I finally surfaced, I was immediately approached by 3 men in civilian suits whom I didn't recognize. They did not formally introduce themselves, just flashed government credentials briefly. They confiscated my equipment, including the cameras, and made me sign a series of documents classifying my discovery as a matter of national security. The samples were never returned, the photos were never seen again, and when I questioned my superiors, I was told the case was closed. 3 days later, I was transferred to another unit and given explicit orders not to discuss what had happened with anyone. Only years later, in discreet conversations with other military divers, did I discover I wasn't alone in my experiences. A veteran of special underwater operations told me about a circular area he found at approximately 150 meters depth, where the water seemed to bend light, creating a kind of underwater lens. When he tried to swim through it, his equipment completely failed. His dive computer, flashlight, and communication system all shut down simultaneously. Everything reactivated only when he backed away in fear from the invisible anomaly. Another diver reported lights similar to the ones I saw in Hawaii, but in different patterns, forming sequences that seemed almost intentional, like a coded visual language. He observed these lights for nearly 20 minutes before they suddenly disappeared, as if they had realized they were being watched. Each of these encounters was documented, reported, and subsequently archived far from the public eye. I carry these memories as silent witnesses that not everything in the world beneath the waves can be explained by our current scientific paradigms. 2 years after my first encounter with the inexplicable, I found myself in the frigid waters of the North Atlantic. The mission involved inspecting a submerged military structure, and I was accompanied by a colleague, Peterson, a stoic man with over 20 years of diving experience. We were at a considerable depth, where darkness is nearly absolute, and the pressure seems to compress not just the body but also the thoughts. During the final inspection, I felt something that any experienced diver instantly recognizes: a sudden change in the water pressure around us. It was as if the ocean itself took a breath, creating currents where there had been only still water. Instinctively, I turned, my flashlight cutting through the darkness in a wide arc. That's when I saw it, partially illuminated by the beam of light, a serpentine form moving methodically in the twilight, just beyond the full reach of my flashlight. It wasn't an eel, nor any known cetacean. The proportions were all wrong. Based on the part I managed to see, I estimated that the creature was at least 20 meters long, with a circumference resembling that of a sequoia trunk. Peterson saw it too. I could tell by the change in his posture, by the way he went completely still, as if fearing that any movement might draw the attention of that thing. What struck me the most was not just its enormous size, but the unnerving way it moved. It wasn't the typical undulating motion of marine creatures. There was something profoundly unsettling about its locomotion. Each segment of its body seemed to move independently, yet in perfect coordination with the rest, as if it were being controlled. It was a movement that suggested a biological complexity I had never witnessed in any other organism. I adjusted my flashlight, trying to capture more of the creature in my field of vision. That's when I managed to illuminate a larger section of its body and saw its skin. Skin might not be the right word. It was a scaly surface, but the scales weren't like those of any known fish or reptile. They formed an almost perfect geometric pattern, interlocking hexagons that reflected light in a peculiar way, absorbing some of it while returning another part in a slightly different spectrum, creating an iridescent effect that seemed almost artificial, designed. The creature passed by us slowly, seemingly indifferent to our presence, as if we were too insignificant to warrant attention. When it finally vanished into the darkness, I realized I had been holding my breath, my heart hammering against my ribs, as if trying to escape. Peterson and I exchanged looks that conveyed more than words ever could. We completed our mission in tense silence and returned to the surface. Hours later, we drafted a detailed report about the encounter. A week later, Peterson was transferred to another unit, in another ocean. I never saw him again. Our report was classified as confidential, and every time I tried to access it in the following years, I was met with bureaucratic denials. In the months that followed, I delved into historical research, searching for similar accounts. I discovered that sightings of massive serpentine creatures were nothing new. They appeared on medieval maps, drawn as monstrous sea serpents with the inscription "Hic sunt dracones," here be dragons. Ship captains in the 19th century documented encounters with great sea serpents in their logbooks, many of them practical, rational men with no inclination toward fantasy. What surprised me was the consistency in descriptions across the centuries, the same unusual locomotion, the same geometric patterns on the skin, the same indifference to human presence. Over time, I met other military divers who had witnessed similar phenomena. One of them, during a recovery operation in the South Pacific, reported seeing a similar creature, but with appendages resembling rudimentary limbs. Another described an encounter where several of these creatures appeared to be interacting in a pattern that suggested complex social behavior, something more advanced than what we observe in intelligent cetaceans like orcas or dolphins. The most disturbing account came from a colleague in the Special Operations Diving Unit. During a deep mission in an oceanic trench in the Pacific, he swore he saw humanoid figures at more than 200 meters depth. They weren't using any visible diving equipment. No tanks, no masks, nothing that suggested they needed assistance to breathe under that crushing pressure. According to him, they were roughly human-sized but with slightly different proportions. Longer limbs, smaller heads. They moved with fluid grace through the water, as if they had evolved specifically for that environment. When they noticed his presence, they didn't flee as most marine creatures would. Instead, they observed him for several moments before disappearing into the depths with astonishing speed. When he reported the incident, he was immediately subjected to psychological evaluation and removed from active duty for 3 months. He eventually returned to service but was never again assigned to deep dives. The institutional response to these encounters follows a predictable pattern. First comes skepticism, offering conventional explanations. A frilled shark or a giant eel seen under poor visibility conditions, nitrogen narcosis affecting perception, or simply an overactive imagination induced by the stress of the deep. When those explanations fail, there is administrative silence, personnel transfers, classified documents. But the oceans keep their secrets well. Consider this. We know more about the surface of the moon than we do about the ocean floor. More than 80% of our planet's deep waters remain unexplored. Every year, marine biologists discover hundreds of new species, many of them with astonishing adaptations for surviving in extreme environments. The oceanic abyss harbors entire ecosystems that function completely without sunlight, under pressures that would crush a conventional submarine, in temperatures that range from near freezing to near boiling near hydrothermal vents. In these extreme conditions, evolution has taken radically different paths from those we know on the surface. We have documented examples of creatures that seem to defy our conventional understanding of biology. The blobfish, with its gelatinous body and almost alien appearance. The Dumbo octopus, with appendages that resemble ears. The giant tube worms, thriving in environments toxic to most creatures. And these are only the species we have managed to document. Is it really so hard to believe that in the vast, unexplored expanses of the oceans, there could exist creatures larger, stranger, and more elusive than those we have already cataloged? Beings that, for evolutionary reasons or others we have barely begun to understand, avoid contact with our species, remaining in the depths where we rarely venture. I don't have all the answers. What I do have are my memories, as vivid today as they were at the moment they happened. Memories of encounters with beings that defy categorization within the parameters of known zoology. And I am certain that I am not alone. Others have seen. Others know. Others carry their own impossible encounters with them. After every encounter with the unexplained, I faced the same pattern of disbelief and cover-up. When I reported the luminous object in Hawaii to my superiors, their immediate reaction was to attribute my experience to nitrogen narcosis. Depth affects the mind, they said. Even experienced divers like you can suffer from temporary hallucinations. But I know how to recognize the signs of narcosis, the euphoria, the false sense of security, the impaired judgment. None of that was present that day. My mind was clear, my senses sharp. The reports were filed away, marked as inconclusive or insufficiently documented. When I insisted, I received veiled advice to drop the matter if I wanted to continue advancing in my career. It wasn't an explicit threat, but the message was clear. Some observations are better left unreported. The situation with Peterson, my colleague who witnessed the serpentine creature in the North Atlantic, was even more disturbing. He was a man of few words, methodical and rational, not someone prone to exaggeration or fantasies. When we wrote our report together, we were extremely careful to be precise and objective, describing only what we saw, without speculation. A week later, Peterson was abruptly transferred to a unit on another continent. I tried to keep in touch, but my messages went unanswered. Eventually, through mutual contacts, I discovered that he had resigned from the Navy just 2 months into his new assignment. No one knew his current whereabouts. Our report, meanwhile, received a red confidential stamp and was removed from standard records. When I tried to access it years later, I was told I needed higher-level clearance that was consistently denied. It was as if the incident had never happened. The most blatant cover-up occurred after my discovery of the metallic structure in the Gulf of Mexico. I had barely returned to the support vessel when I was approached by 3 men in civilian attire. They didn't identify themselves beyond briefly flashing government credentials I didn't recognize. They confiscated my equipment, including the camera with photos of the structure, and the vials containing sediment samples I had collected around the object. "This is classified material now, Sergeant," one of them said, handing me a stack of documents. "We need you to sign these non-disclosure forms." The documents were extensive, filled with legal jargon, but the essence was clear. I was prohibited from discussing what I had seen with anyone who did not have specific authorization. The penalties for violation included imprisonment and substantial fines. I signed each page, noting the bitter irony. I had discovered something potentially groundbreaking, and now I was legally bound to pretend it had never happened. 3 days later, I received transfer orders. My new assignment kept me away from deep-sea diving operations, limiting me to training recruits in shallow waters. A convenient coincidence, no doubt. This isn't just my story. For years, I've collected similar accounts from other military divers, stories shared hesitantly in private conversations, often after a few drinks, and always with cautious glances over the shoulder. A colleague who worked in submarine recovery reported finding a rock formation at 300 meters deep that appeared artificial, perfectly cubic blocks stacked in a pattern suggesting intelligence. When he returned to the site with an official investigation team, the formation had vanished completely. His report was labeled as a navigation error, and the mission was erased from the records. Another described an encounter with what seemed to be advanced technology at the bottom of the Pacific. Devices emitting electromagnetic fields that interfered with his equipment. When he surfaced, he was immediately subjected to extensive medical and psychological evaluations. The doctor suggested he was suffering from PTSD from a previous mission, even though he had never been diagnosed before. He was removed from active duty for 6 months and later reassigned to administrative roles. The mainstream scientific community isn't much more open to these accounts than the military. When I eventually left the Navy and tried to discuss my experiences with oceanographers and marine biologists, I encountered 2 predominant reactions: cautious fascination followed by polite skepticism, or outright and immediate dismissal. Divers experience unique perceptual illusions due to extreme conditions, explained a neuroscientist at a symposium where I attempted to present some of my observations. The combination of high pressure, altered air composition, darkness, and isolation creates the perfect environment for seemingly supernatural experiences. Another researcher suggested that what we saw were merely known species in unusual circumstances. A school of squid forming luminous patterns, a giant oarfish resembling a sea serpent, reflections of secret military equipment being tested nearby. "The ocean is full of tricks of light and shadow," he said, with the confidence of someone who had spent most of his career studying samples in laboratories, not in the depths I had explored. "I am fully aware of conventional explanations. I have carefully considered each one. Could the serpentine creature have been an exceptionally large oarfish? Possibly, except for the unnatural movement and the geometric patterns on its skin. Could the luminous object have been some kind of unknown bioluminescent organism? Maybe, but that wouldn't explain its seemingly intelligent reaction to my presence. And the metallic structure? Secret military equipment is the most plausible explanation, except that no known human technology could account for some of its properties. What disturbs me most is not the skepticism itself. Skepticism is healthy and necessary for scientific progress. What unsettles me is the refusal to investigate, the tendency to dismiss anecdotal evidence without considering that, in unexplored realms like the deep ocean, sometimes personal accounts are all we have to begin with. Consider this. We have explored less than 5% of Earth's oceans. The deepest trenches, like the Mariana Trench with its nearly 11,000-meter depth, have been visited by fewer humans than the surface of the moon. We regularly discover new species, some so bizarre they seem alien. like the blobfish with its almost translucent gelatinous body, or the blue dragon, a sea slug of surreal beauty. If we are still discovering new life forms in relatively accessible areas, what could exist in the vast regions that remain completely unexplored? What extraordinary adaptations? What unrecognized intelligences could have evolved in environments we can barely access? Since leaving the Navy, I have dedicated myself to relentless research, connecting reports similar to mine, searching for patterns and explanations. I have formed an informal network of former military personnel and civilians, deep-sea divers, submarine operators, oil rig technicians, people who have spent significant time in the depths and returned with stories that don't fit within our current understanding. I haven't found definitive answers, only more questions. But I have also found courage in the community, in the validation that comes from knowing others have seen similar things, that I am not alone in my experiences. I know that to many, I sound like just another conspiracy theorist, seeing patterns where there are only coincidences, attributing intelligence and intent where there are only natural phenomena yet to be understood. I understand that skepticism. I was trained to doubt, to seek rational explanations, to trust only verifiable data. But I was also trained to trust my senses, to observe and report accurately, to recognize when something is fundamentally out of place. And what I saw in the depths was fundamentally out of place in our current understanding of the natural world. The oceans cover more than 70% of Earth's surface. They are older than our species, deeper than our technology can easily explore, and more mysterious than we are willing to admit. Maybe we are not alone on this planet. Maybe we never were. And maybe the evidence is down there, in the deep blue, waiting for us to have the courage to truly look, truly see, and, most importantly, truly accept what we find. Since leaving the Navy, I have been researching tirelessly, connecting similar accounts, searching for patterns and explanations. I haven't found definitive answers, only more questions and more reports that align with my experiences. I know it sounds like madness. I know the simplest explanation is that I'm wrong, confused, or lying. But I also know what I saw with my own eyes. And there are others like me, divers, sailors, fishermen, who carry their own impossible stories. The oceans are vast and ancient, guardians of secrets we have barely begun to understand. The next time you look at that seemingly calm blue surface, remember, there is a whole world down there, and not everything that dwells in its depths is recorded in our books of science.